Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Ein ganz, ganz herzliches Willkommen hier bei uns im Körber-Forum und natürlich auch unseren Gästen online. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute so zahlreich hier bei uns zu sehen. Und das ist die erste Körber-Forumsveranstaltung in diesem Jahr. Darüber freue ich mich ganz besonders. Und das ist eine gute Gelegenheit, Ihnen nochmal, wenn auch ein bisschen verspätet, noch alles Gute zum noch jungen Jahr zu wünschen. Ich wage mal eine Prognose. Dieses Jahr wird wahrscheinlich nicht weniger turbulent als das letzte. Aber ich freue mich darüber, dass Sie alle weiterhin zu uns kommen, hier in die Körber-Stiftung, weil das ein Ort sein soll, wo wir uns sachlich, konstruktiv und vor allem im Spirit des Dialogs über das austauschen, was da draußen in der Welt um uns herum so alles passiert. In diesem Sinne nochmal ganz herzlich willkommen. Ich mache weiter mit einer technischen Ansage. Und zwar werden wir das Gespräch heute auf Englisch führen. Diejenigen, die Lust haben, auf Englisch zuzuhören, sind herzlich eingeladen, das zu tun. Wenn Sie lieber auf Deutsch zuhören möchten, dann wäre jetzt ein guter Moment, um Ihre Übersetzungsgeräte aufzusetzen. Und denjenigen, die uns online zuschauen, möchte ich sagen, wir haben unseren Livestream in der Originaltonspur, das heißt auf Englisch. So. Und jetzt mache ich weiter auf Englisch. Now I will switch over to English. Sorry for the short introduction in German. My name is Nora Müller. Once again, a warm welcome to all of you. I head the International Affairs Department of Körber-Stiftung in Berlin, but I'm always happy to come to Hamburg. And today I'm particularly happy and thrilled because we're talking about day after scenarios for Gaza and by extension also for the relations between Israelis and Palestinians and for the wider region. And I think today is a particularly opportune moment to talk about exactly this, because as we speak, people sit in the Qatari capital Doha, working hard towards finding an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and also for the release of the Israeli hostages that are still in Hamas captivity. So we'll see, maybe we'll check our cell phones during the event whether there are any news from Doha, but that is another very good moment to take a close look at the region, and that gives us at least a glimpse of hope in an otherwise very gloomy situation. So we will definitely talk about Doha and the chances for an agreement, maybe obstacles, maybe implications of that. And I am very happy and delighted to say that we have two perfect guest speakers with us tonight for exactly these questions. And I will say, maybe they're a bit of an unlikely pair. And why do I say that? Because I think, you know, in a region as conflict-ridden and as polarized as the Middle East, it's a pretty unique thing to have both of them, Gilad and Ezzedine, here on this stage, very much in the spirit of our founder, Kurt Körber, who always used to say, it's better to talk to each other rather than about one another. So let me, by way of a brief preface, introduce the two of them. We are very happy to have Gilad Sher with us. Gilad is a lawyer, he's an author, he's a researcher, and has a very strong reputation in the field of conflict resolution and negotiations. But he looks at things in the Middle East not only from a theoretical perspective, but also with a lot of experience in practical politics. He used to be lead negotiator at Camp David, at the Camp David talks, and also at the Taba talks. And he was chief of staff to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Those in the room who are a bit older, like myself, will remember Ehud Barak. So that was in the early 2000s, Gilad, right?
1999 to 2001.
Exactly, yeah. So, a warm welcome to you here in Hamburg.
Thank you.
And an equally warm welcome I would like to extend to Ezzedine Shukri Fishere. Ezzedine is also a former diplomat from Egypt. He had several very prestigious stints during his diplomatic career. He was, among other posts, advisor to the Egyptian foreign minister. He also served in Israel, in Tel Aviv, as head of the political department of the Egyptian embassy in Israel. But then he kind of changed course in his career. He's now a senior fellow at the prestigious Dartmouth College in the United States. And you should also know about Ezzedine that he is an award-winning novelist. So if you want to take a look at his literary work, you're also cordially invited to do so. Now, what unites both of them is they are part of a small group of individuals from the Middle East, but also from the US, from European countries, who got together in the wake of the Hamas massacre of October 7th and the ensuing Israeli war against Hamas to come up with ideas for the so-called day after in Gaza, the day after war, the day after conflict. And that's what we would like to talk about tonight. That's what you're here for. So once again, a warm welcome. And no, we won't. Yeah, please. A very well-deserved applause. And before we jump to our discussion, a final word. These two speakers are obviously fascinating speakers, and one could listen to them on and on, but we don't want this to be a lecture. We want this to be an interaction. So what we will do is we will stimulate you intellectually with the first round of discussion of 20, 25 minutes or so. Then we'll invite you to pose questions. For our viewers online, you can do so via Menti, and you may want to use the code, I have to read this out, 89072425. And my colleague Clara Bradenbrock, who is with us over there, she will share with us whatever comes in through Menti into our discussion. And then we'll do the same drill once again after the first round of questions and have a discussion here on stage and then open it up for your comments and your questions later on. Now we're ready to start. And I have a first question to both of you, actually. We mentioned Doha and the talks that are going on apparently on the finishing line. It seems that we've been there before, and then on the final meters of the discussions, the whole thing blew up. So I wanted to ask both of you, and maybe Ezzedine, I can start with you, on a scale from 1 to 10, how optimistic are you that this time around this will produce something tangible?
5.
Oh, that's good enough. That's a diplomat's answer.
It's I'd rather be on the cautious side because I think the dynamics of the conflict are very unpredictable, and there are so many players that are involved. And I think, sadly, both on the Israeli and the Palestinian side, the players that have dictated the pace over the last 20 years have been the parties that are not interested in coexistence, that are interested in making sure that their visions, which are mutually exclusive, prevail. And I think October 7 is an exhibit of that. but I think also anybody who has followed Israeli politics and seen how the religious Zionism, the religious Zionist and the Messianic kind of elements manage to dictate the pace would also reach the same conclusion. So obviously, it's great that we have anything positive, like an agreement, a ceasefire agreement, even if we have a partial ceasefire agreement, because it means for both communities, hostages will go back to their families and loved ones, even if not the entire group, right? And also means that the bombing and the killing will stop in Gaza, and both have tremendous impact on Israelis and on societies, positive one. But my fear is if this positive change, if it happens, if it's not immediately followed by steps to stabilize this and move to something more durable that take us to a positive vision for the future, that we will be sooner or later back to where we are now.
Gilad, with all your diplomatic experience, take us into these rooms in Doha. I mean, how do these negotiations, how are they conducted? What's going on there now as we speak?
Well, first of all, we have to say that I give a 6, not a 5.
Okay, you're on the optimistic note.
I'm prudently optimistic because it's a first step to at least subside the agony, the suffering, and the bereavement of the war. And the number one issue for us is the release of our hostages. 251 persons, elderly, children, women, and men were taken hostage on the October 7th. Some of them were murdered during captivity. Some of them died during captivity. And we see the first step of their initial release of 33, probably in the next few weeks, and a ceasefire in Gaza, at least a temporary one, which is a good step. I'm not putting the expectations on a too high level, but this is a positive traction towards resolving more and more issues that are at stake. Now, within this room, there are many go-betweens. Mm-hmm. We had Qatar, we had Egypt, we had the Turks for a certain moment. Even you Germans were involved in the negotiations about the hostages release. And this is not a direct negotiation between a country, a sovereign country, Israel, and a terrorist organization, Hamas, a radical terrorist, horrific ideology of Hamas. So we cannot negotiate directly. We do not want to negotiate directly, so we have go-betweens. And the go-betweens, it works like that. They get some kind of plan. They get first to the representatives of Hamas outside of Gaza. They get a green light or a somewhat green light. They bring it back to the Hamas in Gaza when there was a leadership by Yahya Sinwar, who is not anymore with us on this earth. And then we get an answer which can come like a month afterwards, negative, positive, partly positive. And then everything changes because the whole situation has changed. The situation in Gaza has changed. The situation of the hostages has changed. And we have to start everything all over again. This is the kind of negotiations through a third party that always lose some of the original purposes and intentions on the way towards the end game. But right now, it seems that everything is ripe enough to enter into this final round of negotiations on the first phase of a temporary ceasefire and a a partial release of Israeli hostages. So this is why I'm prudently optimistic. I hope that within the next 2 or 3 weeks we will know whether this can move forward to a complete release of the hostages and to a full-fledged ceasefire in Gaza. However, if we leave Gaza without any control of anyone except what's left from Hamas, then the day after will be darker than the day we live now.
And that is, Gilad, the perfect lead over to the actual content of your work of the past months. I mean, when we look at Gaza, we see that, total plight of the people there, a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable proportion, loss of human life, destruction of infrastructure. So it's hard to imagine how from that starting point you can work towards a good future. Plus, as you mentioned, I mean, it doesn't seem a real option to have what is left of Hamas as a governing force in place. So what is a good scenario for a good day after scenario for Gaza?
A good day after scenario would be a transition throughout another body, which is not Hamas, for both the reconstruction of Gaza, the rehabilitation of the population in Gaza, and the relocation of some of them in Gaza, as well as building a transition governing body that would comprise regional actors such as the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Palestinians from the Palestinian Authority, but they need to gain some traction towards being able and capable of doing that, and this will take time. This is why what we see in our work is a transition period of a year or two until the Palestinians themselves could govern Gaza throughout a reinforced, rejuvenated, and reformed governance of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian security forces that would be capable of managing this problematic area and problematic population after years and years of Hamas terrorism. Now, it is very difficult to see the light when you are in the midst of a conflict, a bloody conflict, and when there is so much suffering on all sides. By the way, our children, yesterday at 2 a.m., went to the shelters because of some missile that was launched from Yemen, from the Houthis in Yemen, okay? And it's almost a daily practice, a daily kind of agenda for Israelis. Nobody knows about that outside of Israel. But October 7th, when the massacre happened, it was under thousands and thousands of rockets and missiles from Gaza at the same time to the centers of Israel, to Tel Aviv, to Haifa, to Netanya in Jerusalem, etc., even Jerusalem, by the way. And when we look at other conflicts elsewhere, we see that throughout the conflict, you cannot possibly envision the way out of it. But once you have some scheme of transition from war to peace, from war to normalization, to normalcy, then you can start thinking about the possibility that is just a glimpse of hope that you can get to some kind of normal life in your lifetime. And this is what we aspire to.
And that is what we do with your work. Ezzedine, when I listen to Gilad saying what the sort of preconditions are for the realization of this vision, then I hear we have this consortium of regional and extra-regional forces that, will be somehow in the background to help govern Gaza. We'll have a reformed Palestinian Authority to be in government and to take care of governance of Gaza. And then, that begs the question, of course, I mean, the track record of regional powers on playing such roles is at best mixed, and the Palestinian Authority has many virtues. Being able to reform itself is not certainly one of them. So how do you deal with that?
This is why I'm staying with my 5.
Okay.
I mean, we have a vision for the future, and I just want to emphasize that it's a vision for the future. It's not to go back to October 6. So even if we undo everything that has happened since October 7, hostages are back. We can't bring back the dead on either side, but hostages are back. Israel withdraws from Gaza. Gaza some miraculously reconstructed. And that's it. We will be on October 6. That was the situation on October 6, which means the next day you have October 7. So we don't want to go back there. We want to take the parties from this mayhem they are in into something different. Now, the something different, and that will link to your question, I'm not trying to dodge it, by the way. The something different is a situation where the Israelis are recognized by the Palestinians in their national home, Israel, as a nation, and the Palestinians exercise self-determination. And the two are intertwined, right? So
but that would still mean the two-state solution, or if you say the two are intertwined, then is it confederation, or
well,
what
this is up to the parties to decide.
Okay.
But ultimately, unless there is a Jewish national home and a Palestinian national home, this conflict is going to continue in some form or another. Now, to get there, this is the one thing that might change the game for the regional partners. For Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and so on, to come in and play an assertive role. And for me, it's not just a background. They have to shoulder responsibility, because the Palestinian Authority or even the UN is not capable of providing Israel with the security guarantees that the Israelis themselves, not just the government, that the Israeli people who's traumatized, who has seen since October 7 their worst fears happen, right? So they need to feel reassured by some adults that they trust that their security is protected. A consortium of Arab states working with international players can play this role and should. But for them to be able to do this, they need to be certain that this is on the path to Palestinian self-determination, so that they can face their own population when they do this, but they can also bring Palestinians on board, which is key to success. So if we get this, which is a big question mark, obviously, if we get this, then with the right pressure, combination of pressure and incentive, we can get the regional players to play that new role that they have been so far reluctant to play.
I think that's a very convincing argument. You mentioned the adults that need to come in to kind of, yes, help the parties to the conflict stay course. And that brings me to January 20th and the new U.S. administration. I mean, Trump has a track record of, doing politics in the Middle East. And if I remember correctly, he was the one to relocate the U.S. embassy to Israel, to Jerusalem. He was the one to strike the Abraham Accords. He was the one to sort of apply maximum pressure on Iran. But I wonder on that background whether he will be a force that, you know, will be conducive to the kind of support that you have in mind when it comes to the parties to the conflict sitting together and doing what needs to be done.
I think what we both have in common is that we were realists, and we know that our only option is to work with what we have got. We don't choose the partners, we don't choose the players. Trump is a wild card. He's very unpredictable. He has done all these things. Some of them, or some of that attitude could be useful, and some of it could be very harmful. Mm-hmm. So I don't think anybody has an answer as to what Trump is going to do or which direction this will take. But I think this is why I am a great believer in the autonomy of the players in the region themselves. I think the United States is an indispensable partner, but only in the support role. I'm not one of those who think the US can come in and put pressure on Israel and get Israel to do things that Israel is unwilling to do. I don't think so.
Oh, it didn't work. I mean,
it never worked. It never worked. It worked like for 5 minutes and a couple of times over 60 years. So I'm not going to bank on this. I think the best things happen historically when the Israelis and Arab partners, Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians, and so on, built something, agreed on things, and then brought the others on board. So where my hope is in the region that Israelis, Egyptians, Jordanians, and Palestinians and Saudis can come up with something or subscribe to something, and then the United States would be a support to it. If we follow Trump, I think it's very risky.
Gilad, what do you think?
I think that one of the unique assets of our framework is that everyone has a role here. The United States, the Europeans, and the regional actors, including, of course, Israel and the Palestinians. We have to kind of elevate our outlook to the regional and international implementation and control of the whole process. Because bilaterally, I agree, it's always good to speak to one another instead of having someone else wanting peace more than you yourself want, okay? However, we need some kind of a kindergarten teacher here. And this could be done throughout an international and regional involvement on the ground with us in the room. This is number one. Number two is we cannot talk today, neither to Palestinians nor to Israelis, on a two-state for two people and full stop. We have to do it in a gradual manner with some changes on the ground that people do understand something is changing. Israelis and Palestinians are changing their mindsets because of what they see is happening on the ground.
Kind of a peace dividend. A peace dividend that is tangible for people.
Exactly, and it's not yet peace, but it is back to normalcy. And number three is a very strong monitoring and implementation control of the whole process, which is what we failed in throughout the Oslo process since the Madrid conference, in the last 3.5 decades of peacemaking from time to time, and of a lot of rounds of war and conflicts and belligerence in others. So these three elements, regional and international, two states for two people in a gradual manner, with at the end a separation or a disengagement between Israelis and Palestinians into two distinct nation states with a border between them. And number three, see that everything is happening and not just on a piece of paper that is signed by signatories.
Well, I would say that was a very harmonious first round. Do the two of you ever disagree with each other?
Oh, yes.
Oh, you do? Okay, then I'm...
But can I say something about the disagreement?
Okay, please do.
I think it's important. This conflict, it's a conflict, but also peace and the future, the two societies, the two nations are intertwined. And this applies for everybody. Nobody can, in my view, understand this conflict properly if you don't take into account the multiple perspectives that you hear about the conflict. If you don't take into account the Jewish perspective, the Zionist perspective on the conflict, if you don't take into account the Palestinian national perspective, if you don't take them both into account, you will only have part of the story. Now, it's okay, you can have part of the story and go on living, but if you want to solve the conflict, you need to bring both. So instead of us playing negotiations as if the two of us are going to kind of divide the territory between us, the positive thing that we can do is that we bring the concerns of both narratives or of both societies, nations, and try to see what formula that can work that would accommodate the basic concerns of each. What are I defer to Gilad on what are the most important things for the Israelis? What would make a majority of Israelis buy this solution? Because even if he agrees on something that, say he's very far left and he's going to, hand me half of Jerusalem, but then...
But you know what it is. It's security.
Here we go.
As simple as that.
So, and I, or Samih, our colleague who's not here, can tell him what are the most important things for the Palestinians. For example, Samih, if he was here, he would say, we can have a state in 5 years, we can have a state in 10 years, but we have to know for certain, with credibility, that it's not a pie in the sky, that there are actual steps that are taking us there. So the added value of us working together is that we bring those perspectives and weave them together so that we have something that would be acceptable to the interested parties. Not that we, fight or disagree, which we obviously do.
Which you obviously do. So we have learned that for the Israeli society, the key priority is security, and for the Palestinian side, it's definitely the perspective of having an independent Palestinian state.
Credible path.
A credible path. Not, okay, it's going to happen in 100 years, yes, but a concrete vision for that. Now, before we break for questions from our colleagues here in the audience, you brought an idea and a question to my mind, Izzedine. You talked about sort of different visions and how we have to take into consideration those different visions. If you were to say there's one thing that people in Europe get totally wrong about the conflict, what is that one thing?
I think it might be the trying to find a party to blame, and trying to I don't want to use the word preach, but try to imagine that the solution is for this party to do this, this, and that. And I think that applies to supporters of Palestine and supporters of Israel as well. I hear often people who's like, well, the Palestinians or the Israelis, if they just stop doing A, B, and C, and do this and this, and look how, at the history of Europe and how we moved from there, then if they just do this, then maybe there is a hope. If they don't, then that's their problem. And that might be analytically correct, but it's politically completely unhelpful, because the parties do what they're motivated to do and what they are concerned. What defines their behavior is their motivation, their concerns, and their fears. Whether there's Israelis, and different groups within Israel, right? And preaching or kind of, pointing fingers is morally satisfying for everybody. You can decide who's right and who's wrong and go home. But it doesn't help the parties at all.
That makes sense. Gilad, what's one thing that Europeans get wrong about the Middle East and the conflict?
Well, I don't think that people outside of Israel understand what we have been going through throughout the last couple of decades. The fighting terrorism and countering terrorism from all around us through the proxies of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, being bombarded and shot over on a daily basis in our civilian centers. I visited this morning with my wife St. Nikolai Church, and I saw the memorial exposition there. I was, of course, aware of the suffering of the civil society and the civilians during World War II, but I was not aware of the magnitude of what Hamburg as a city suffered in July and August 1943. The numbers are really shocking to me, were shocking to me, and I know a little bit about history. This is what I feel is not really acknowledged by international actors about Israel, about the situation in Israel. And I think we have to transcend our daily life throughout those decades perhaps in a more efficient manner to the international community and to the European actors as well, because the right of self-defense should not be put in question. War is something that is horrific, tragic, everywhere, anywhere, by whoever has to fight. But the right of self-defense cannot be limited on some kind of a double standard, and the limitations put on Israel to self-defend itself are not proportionate to the need to fight in 7 fronts simultaneously, in the north, in the south, in the east, and from places like 2,500 kilometers from us, like Yemen, for instance. This is something that I think you have to acknowledge and understand, which is I think would be kind of leveraging the criticism over whatever Israel is doing in order to defend itself.
Thank you for that, Gilad. I would always say, definitely, the right to the right of self-defense is unquestionable, but there's also the issue of proportionality that needs to be discussed. And I understand that this is a very difficult conversation to have. Maybe this is a good point to now invite our colleagues and guests here in the room to pose their questions. And I would always ask you to briefly introduce yourselves. Please tell me to whom your question is addressed. And please also remember that every question should ideally end with a question mark. And I will start with this side of the room. I do see a gentleman in the 3rd row. The mic is coming to you. Clara is coming to you. Yes. A bit of acrobatics involved here.
My name is Klaus-Peter Krüger, and my question is announced to both speakers, because I have listened very carefully to your talk, but I've missed a big thing. I'm rather astonished that you haven't mentioned Iran. To me, it's a sort of white elephant in the room, because Iran is the most interested terror partner of the Hamas. Without Iran, Hamas had not that power and impact and destructive power against Israel. In so far, I think a solution is not possible without Iran and its safety interests that they now try to cover by Hamas.
Sorry, I hate to be impolite. Can I remind you of the question mark part?
But that's my statement. Thank
okay, so that it's about Iran's role, and maybe I can add to that question. Actually, we wanted to come to the regional dimension of things in the second part of our conversation, but maybe I can add to that question. How do you see Iran's role now? Is it weakened, and is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And because I wouldn't want to have all the questions addressed to the two speakers, I will now use my authority as a moderator and throw that question into your court, Ezzedine.
Iran has played a very negative role as far as peace process is concerned over the last 25 years. And all attempts to bring Iran to at least allow the peace process to proceed unsubverted, those efforts didn't work. Even when all of the Arab states agreed on what became the Arab Peace Initiative, and we got the Islamic State, the League of Islamic States, to support it, Iran still wouldn't support it. So Iran's and the support to Hezbollah, the support to Hamas, and so on, and Houthis. So Iran has been very clear about what it was doing. The problem is, Iran doesn't, number one, there's no scenario, there is no world in which Iran doesn't exist. Or if you're waiting for a regime change, you might be waiting for a very long time. A lot of people have been waiting for decades. So then the challenge becomes what to do with this, how to contain that influence, how to counter it. And that's a real operational question that has answers, and we tried to come up with answers in our work to that. Iran has been recently very weakened, and that might help. But here comes the other part of the story. As I said, this is a multi-perspective, this is a multi-dimensional story, so remember, stories are intertwined. Imagine if Iran is out completely. And Hamas is miraculously kind of became silent. What about the other side? What about those in Israel who are committed to Jewish sovereignty over the West Bank? There is a clear risk that Israel, victorious, with no challenge whatsoever, would feel that the status quo is not so bad. And why do we have to make any concessions? And then it will become very difficult, even for Israelis who are willing and who are pushing for a solution. It will be difficult for them and for the rest of the region to overcome this segment in the Israeli political landscape.
So what the argument is that Iran is needed as a counterbalance for the extreme Israeli right?
No, the argument is we have two spoilers, and if we get rid of one spoiler, it would be great, but it doesn't mean that we're moving to peace, because there is the other spoiler, and they're linked.
Gilad, I will bring you into the conversation.
In order to counter Iran is the main perpetrator of terrorism and violence in the world. It's a global threat. It's not just a Middle East or Israeli threat. The only way to counter Iran is by a very robust coalition, international and regional coalition, and this is what we offer in our framework. A coalition, a security and political coalition that would counter Iran in its quest for dominance in the Middle East. I agree. Iran is weakened right now because its proxies are very weak currently, and because it failed in attacking directly Israel twice. Once in April, where over 200 cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and other drones, etc., explosive drones were launched all over Israel. and all of them, except very few, were intercepted by an alliance of the Brits, the Americans, Israel, and some Arab countries that I will not mention here. And in October, on October 1st as well, there is no other way to look at Iran but as a threat that is not going to stop trying to get an unconventional weaponry capability. I've heard the briefing by Secretary Blinken just a few hours ago, and he repeated the statement by President Biden that the United States will not allow Iran to get capabilities of unconventional weaponry. Nuclear weapons, no. The question is, what will be the other problems that the new administration in the United States will face, because the United States is the leading power against all the aspirations of Iran to annihilate Israel and to destroy whatever is not radical Islamist Shia in the world. But now the crescent that they tried to put together from Yemen throughout Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon is no longer existing. And this is one good news for the time being.
One good news for Israel, and maybe we can talk a bit about that in the second round. But before we do so, let's go for more questions. And I do see a question over there in the back of our room. The lady on the left side, exactly.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Thomas. I have a question to Ezzedine, and this is more about the socio-psychological dimension of the problem. You put until now the focus on the process, and let's imagine, hopefully, imagine that this process comes on track. But I imagine that, and now I talk only about one side, although I know, of course, the other side as well, but I don't want to make it too complicated. So there must be, on the Gaza population, which is a quite young population, an enormous amount of hate, which has been piled up, especially by those youngsters who don't understand anything what is going on, but they just see falling bombs and so on. So how to get onto them, to integrate them in some way, because they are feeding until now the fighters of the Hamas again and again. Okay, Hamas now it's weak, but you have to take the population on board as well on a process like that. The intellectuals, the negotiators, all them, if we hope of a good world, they might be willing to do so. But how to get all these people who really feel, full of hate, how to get them on into the process? This is my question. Thank you.
Very interesting question. Thank you, Ezzedine.
Thank you. Number one, there is no shortage of hate in that story. It's not a new phenomenon. We have been dealing with this for a very long time. What happened in Gaza has left the Palestinian population in general, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, deeply, deeply traumatized and radicalized. So to bring them back is going to be even more difficult than it has been already. Opinion polls, and I invite you to check, there is a Palestinian Center for Research that publishes opinion polls among Palestinians, and they do an admirable work, and it's mirrored by an Israeli center. So there is Khalil Shiqaqi in Ramallah and Dalia Shandlin in Israel, and they work together to measure public opinion on both. Now, when they ask Palestinians, young and old, about their view of Israel, extremely negative, expectedly. When they ask Palestinians if they are willing to accept that Israel in its pre-67 borders become a national home for Jews, the the percentage of support is very limited. We're talking about around 10%, right? However, when they unpack this question and they say having a national home for Jews, having Israel as a national home for Jews, at the same time Palestine as a national home for Palestinians, with this, and this means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then the level of support goes up to 60%. Now, this is probably anecdotal, but it points to a direction, is that the way for healing from trauma is not only by talking to people or organizing forum or getting Seeds of Peace to work with children from both sides. All of these are good. But the actual broad path to get the society out of the trauma is to offer an actual alternative to a good life. Those young Palestinians, if they see, if I take this option, I can go to school, I can go to college, I can have a life, I can travel, I can, and so on, that changes things for people. And so far we have been unable to do this. There were moments where that seemed within reach, but then it evaporated. This is why I said earlier, having a credible path to independence and statehood is the key for Palestinians. And then the healing should be a part of that process. But it can't happen without that process.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question in this round. And let me go to Clara. Clara, all quiet on the Menti front, or do we have comments from
we had one question that was very similar to yours. And then another one that is, what do Israeli people think of their leadership at the moment? And is there growing support or even criticism?
Wow, thank you. That's a question
What
for
is the question?
Gilad. Clara, would you want to...
What do Israeli people think of their leadership at the moment? And is there growing support or maybe criticism?
On the current leadership in Israel?
Yes.
Well, it's a very tricky question. Let me just say the following. Firstly, I do not represent my government here. I represent the Israeli on the street, and I am a has-been and not a currently assuming any responsibility, governmental responsibility. The people of Israel are mainly concerned by the internal struggle over the identity of Israel as a democratic nation state of the Jewish people, much more than with the foreign policy or the war or anything else. Since the inauguration of this government in early 23, the Israeli public demonstrated on a weekly basis on the streets in an unprecedented tenacity and vigor for the democratic foundations of the State of Israel, the independence of the judicial system, the separation of powers between the legislative, the judiciary, and the executive. And this is the main concern that drove the public onto the streets until October 7th. Since then, since the massacre of October 7th, we are in a war. This is wartime. So people are concerned with their dear ones fighting on the battlefield, and with the bereavement of a nation, and much more than they were concerned by the former issues. However, there is a vast criticism of the current government because of some elements in it that are messianic, extremists, racist, and expansionists in a way that are anti-democratic in our opinion. And there's a lot of people that would like to see this government replaced by a liberal Democrat government that does not contain this kind of ministers in it. However, this is a democracy. People vote in in the polling stations, and whatever comes out as a result, a coalition. I mean, I don't have to tell you what a coalition should look like.
We know a thing or two about it.
Anyway, on the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the recent polls show that there is a very sharp drop in the support for a two-state for two-people solution, from over 50, between 50 and 60%, to under 25%. However, there is also 25% support for disengagement from the Palestinians and not necessarily annexing the territories, as some of our government ministers would like to see. So the Israeli people is currently in trauma and post-trauma, but it is still a very vibrant democracy, and with the hope that democracy will prevail and that the initial foundations of the State of Israel, as incorporated in the Declaration of Independence of 1948, will prevail over any other principles.
Thank you, Gilad. That's a good sort of closing point for this part of the conversation, which now leads us to the second round, and that also leaves us with a challenge of covering all the rest of the region in 30 minutes. It's a mission impossible, but we will just get started, I would say. You know, one of the things that I put on my list that I wanted to discuss with you is what's currently going on in one of Israel's neighboring countries, and that is Syria. As you know, we have almost 1 million Syrians living in this country, and of course that makes us particularly interested in current developments in Syria. I think we were all quite surprised and also encouraged by the fact that the Assad regime was deposed, but now the question is what comes next, and we've seen a bit of what comes next, and there are some cautious signs that things might move in a good direction, but by and large the future is pretty unclear when it comes to Syria. So what I wanted to ask the two of you is, maybe you can help us understand what's going on in Syria at the moment, and tell us also what you think are the implications for the relations between Israel and the Palestinians are going to be. Ezzedine, but maybe on the part of help us understand what's going on in Syria, that's for you.
If I could understand, I would probably be in a better position. I just have to say a disclaimer that the Syrians are ecstatic about the fall of the Assad regime. And the majority of Syrians I know or know of are very optimistic and in a almost euphoric mode. And I know this mode because this is where we Egyptians have been in 2011 after the fall of Mubarak. But then other things happened. So being a castaway of the Tahrir uprising myself, I am not nearly as optimistic as the majority of the Syrians. Especially, at least in the case of Egypt, we had a rainbow coalition among the protesters. And it was a popular uprising. But this is a militia that overthrew a regime. And it's an Islamist, jihadi, Qaeda-linked militia. So I
Turned good.
Turned good, right? I don't know what good, because none of the things that they have said so far or did contradicts the basic tenets of the program. So I haven't heard them saying, oh, we're going for a secular state. They said, we will take care of everybody. We will take care of the minorities. We will, we will not kill the Christians, something like that, right? Or the Yazidis. We will just, But that does this mean full citizenship? Does this mean representation? Does this mean a political system that is democratic and allows people to compete? Does this mean full equality or anything like full equality, not just men and women, but also everybody? We don't know. The appointments we have seen are all jihadis taking, right? So personally, but that's my personal view and assessment, I am not very hopeful about the direction things will take in Syria, except that it seems that their priority right now is not to cause more havoc outside of their borders, but to gain control within. But what's going to happen inside Syria, I'm sorry to say that at best it will be something like Iran, and at worst it will be something like Afghanistan. I don't see it going beyond those parameters. But I am, if I am wrong, I'll be a very happy person.
You started out with that 5 thing, Ezedin. Now it's
Syria's not 5. If we can get Syria to 5, yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for injecting that dose of realistic pessimism, maybe, or pessimistic realism into our conversation.
Give me a jihadi movement that took over a state, or an Islamist with it, right? Movement that took over a state and run it in any way that looks like a functioning state. Sudan, Gaza, Iran, Afghanistan, those are the models we have. So why would this be any better? Because the Turks are helping? Is this that's our hope?
And why do you think you have 1 million Syrians in here? Because Assad butchered over 500,000 Syrians during the last 10 years, since 2011, okay? And Syria was the home ground for Russia and for Iran. It is not anymore. It does not serve as the home ground for them anymore. I tend to share the perspective of my friend Ezedin, and Israel is right now just waiting and watching very carefully what's happening in Syria. And
doing some other things in Syria.
More than watching.
Well, when there is an imminent threat, you have to handle it, because otherwise it becomes a much bigger bear. Okay, and so you have to deal with it when it's young, and not allow this threat to become too problematic to handle afterwards. Such was the case in 2007, when we destroyed a nuclear power center, in a nuclear plant in Syria, and such was the case of destroying the Air Force capabilities of Syria during the last couple of months.
What do you say, Gilad, if I can ask you, because the starting point was, can there be, repercussions on the Israeli-Palestinian relationship? Does Syria have any impact on that, or are these two completely separate theaters?
It never has. It never had, by the way, and I don't think that just because of the I would say even tectonic changes in Syria, I don't think that it will affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any way whatsoever.
So from an Israeli point of view, you would say the perspective is an ambivalent one, because on the one hand, Iran was pretty much kicked out of Syria, but on the other hand, Assad was always the devil for Israel. So, what's on Israel's northern border is now pretty difficult to predict. And
don't forget the Turks, who would like to also to get some hand in the Kurdish parts of Syria. Well, this, as I said, there's no way to analyze in an intelligent manner what will happen with this transitional regime in Syria. I'm not sure how it will come. I mean, we know the sources of this regime are radicals and terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, etc. So nothing very good to expect, but they seem to try to govern in the civil manner. And I'm not sure if they succeed, because Syria is a very weak country right now, very poor country with no natural resources or whatever to recuperate whatever has been lost. But at least governing in a normal manner, in a way that allows the minority in Syria to try and get their act together. Probably whatever I read and listen from analysts, Syria will not remain one state with sovereignty over all the minorities in Syria. Many people think, and I'm talking about experts, that it will be divided into 4 different sub-states, in a way.
You know, since we're in January this year, I thought we might use this opportunity to do some crystal ball gazing, and I have 3 scenarios for you, to which I would like you to ask to respond. And Syria is, in fact, one of them, and you kind of already gave your analysis. So the question is, what do you think about the following? Elections and peaceful transfer of power in Syria. Is that realistic for 2025? A no by Ezzeddin and another no by
Not real elections.
Gilad.
You know, there's a story about elections in Syria that I was told by a former ambassador of the United States to Syria, Edward Jerejian. You know him, okay? He once went to see Assad, the father, Hafiz al-Assad, after the general elections in Syria. Assad won 99.2%. And he asked him, what happened with this 0.8%? So Assad tells him, don't worry, we have all the addresses.
Wow, that sends a shiver down your spine. Wow. Maybe on a more optimistic note, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. I mean, we might be seeing that very soon.
Yes, hopefully.
So we're again back to 5 and 6, I guess. And then my final scenario for you is about Iran and the US, really. A start of US-Iran negotiations in the course of this year.
Well, I think there is... you can just say I'm a pessimist, right? So you can just blame it on that. I think there is a serious risk of a military confrontation between Israel and Iran in the coming few weeks. I can elaborate if you want, but I think it's a serious prospect. And even if we don't want this to happen or want, it doesn't matter. I think it's important that we think what the implications would be, and be prepared for it.
Gilad, we hear a lot about, you know, this argument that now it's this golden opportunity for Israel. Iran is weakened, its proxies are weakened in the region. It's now or never if you want to strike and go for the nuclear program. Would you agree? I mean,
I don't think it's in the cards. I don't think it's in the cards. Israel cannot do it on its own. And for a new administration in the United States, it will take at least 6 to 8 months to get its act together in terms of foreign policy, as it usually does. I don't think that it will happen soon. And first of all, we have to connect your question to the developments between the United States and Saudi Arabia. This creates a kind of a axis between the relatively moderate Arab countries of the region and the Western world. And this is countering Iran in a way that might contain also a subsiding of their willingness to fight at this point in time. I believe that the Iranians will be looking for all kinds of avenues to get back to some agreement, like the JCPOA, some kind of an agreement with the United States, with the new administration. And I understand that in Washington, D.C., they do not rule it out at this point in time. That this might happen during this 2025, perhaps in, back-channel negotiations first, and then in more open ones, like it was in the last round. Trump was mistaken to get out of the JCPOA. I think it was not the perfect deal, but it was a good agreement that required improvements. The walking away of the United States allowed Iran to unleash its hegemonial aspirations and to speed up the rushing towards the weaponry of nuclear sort. And I believe that they are now, because of what we analyzed before during this evening, I believe that it is in their best interest to look for a way to have some agreement with the United States, and this is why I don't think that the United States will allow Israel to attack Iran during this time.
So would that mean, from an Israeli point of view, that's an opportunity that's just squandered, because that may not be come back for I don't know how long?
Well, you know how big Iran is and how small Israel is. So
yeah, but I also know about the military capabilities.
We have to be more humble, I believe, in our aspiration to stop Iran on its way to nuclear weaponry.
Well, this conversation ends on a very thoughtful note, I would say, but I made it a rule to myself in these, pretty gloomy times to always try and conclude a conversation with a note of optimism. So I will stick to that route tonight, and I will ask you, Izzadeen, and you, Gilad, as well, what is the one thing that makes you optimistic for the future of the Middle East? That is a question for you, Izzadeen, for you particularly.
I might surprise you, but I'm committed to an optimistic look for the Middle East. And I don't see it as a contradiction with my realistic assessment of the dangers in the Middle East. And for me, it is that the dangers are, in fact, the reason for my optimism. It's because things are very bad in the Middle East, and because things could get a lot worse in the Middle East, and not just between Israelis and Palestinians, but within Middle Eastern societies and countries. I mean, if you look at the region, it's not just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? Look at Syria, look at Egypt, look at Iraq, look at all the other countries. So those countries are like almost on the brink, right? But ultimately, we in the Middle East, we are just regular people, and we want to have functioning lives. And we have emotions and hopes like everybody else. And this determination to survive and this determination to find a way forward, for me, is the one thing that never went away, even when people were in despair and said they were in despair and all of that. But the minute there is an opening, look at the Syrians today. The minute there is all the apathy that Syria has been living in, and the civil war and the mayhem and the traumatism, the trauma that they they went through with this unspeakable violence that was inflicted on them. But the minute there is an opening, you see all this energy coming out. And that applies to all other societies. And as you said at the beginning, today Israel and Palestine, they're in this very, very dark place. But the minute there is an opening, you will see a very different attitude. And for me, that's a cause for optimism. And that's a cause for everybody to try, while maintaining this realistic understanding of what's happening, try to push to create those openings.
You know, the founder of Israel and the founder of Israel and the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, he once said that, you know, to be realistic and pragmatic in Israel, as a Jew, you have to believe in miracles. So I don't believe in miracles, but I do believe in the fact that history shows that all conflicts get to an end at some point in time, even if it takes hundreds or dozens of years. And I've researched many conflicts, dozens of conflicts, that were intractable and protracted that were bloody conflicts in which there was violence and religious animosity and a lot of cultural gaps or whatever. Just name the dimension that you would like. We have all this in the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But they all came to an end eventually. And people who did not believe throughout many years that it is possible found themselves shaking hands with the other party. This is my source of optimism based on research and history. We will eventually get the hope to have the upper hand over despair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. So we will leave the remaining 10 minutes as promised to your questions. Yet again, you know the drill. And we will start maybe with this side, because I don't think we have gone to the left side last time. If there are any questions, if you need a moment more to think, we will go to the gentleman here who was first in the middle.
Ja, mein Name ist Freudenthal. Ich habe eine Frage. Ist nicht ein Teil des Problems, dass Israel seit den Osloer Verträgen und trotz der Osloer Verträge weiterhin ständig weiteres Land der Palästinenser okkupiert und der Gazastreifen wurde jahrelang als größtes Freiheitsgefängnis der Welt bezeichnet. Die UN hat schon vor Jahren gesagt, der Gazastreifen ist unbewohnbar. Und wenn speziell in Deutschland so getan wird, als hätten alle Probleme mit dem Überfall und dem Massaker der Hamas begonnen, dann ist das in meinen Augen einfach falsch. Der UN-Teilungsplan...
Sorry, I have to interrupt you because I will have to translate that into English, and therefore I'm making notes, but also for the sake of clarity and brevity, could I ask you to also give us a question?
Die Frage ist also ganz klar, kann man so einseitig dieses Problem angehen, wie das hier heute Abend geschehen ist?
I was hoping that, you know, we had a multi-perspective conversation, but thank you for the question. Let me translate it for you. The question that was posed to the panel was, in light of Israel's settlement activities, in light of the fact that Gaza was seen by many as an open-air prison, wasn't that the context to what happened on October 7th, and should that be borne in mind when we discuss the situation in the region right now? And I hope I paraphrased your question correctly. Gilad?
I don't think that the Hamas terrorists who invaded Israel on the 7th of October thought about any settlement or any settler in the West Bank as their motivation for raping, burning children alive, killing 1,400 innocent people, and abducting 251 of them in the tunnels, the terror tunnels of Hamas. None of them was aware of anything of that sort. This is not the cause for the animosity between Hamas as a terrorist group who wishes to annihilate Israel, and this is their credo. They want to kill as many Jews as possible, as many Israelis as possible, as many Americans as possible, and it is not on your doorstep, it is on our doorstep, and we are the outpost for the Western world for that, with settlements and without settlements. I'm the one who is looking for, since the mid-90s, I'm looking for the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a way that would delineate a border between the nation-state of Israel and the nation-state of Palestine. And by that, I would say that some of the settlements that are in the heart of the West Bank will have to go, will have to be evacuated. Some others will be part of the areas that would be annexed to Israel and compensated by a land swap for the Palestinians. And the vast majority of the settlers live very near the borderline or the lines of 1967, so they can be incorporated within Israel. This is not the problem for that. And Gaza as a prison, well, you should ask my friend, he is Egyptian, and I think that the border between Gaza and Egypt could be opened as the border between Gaza and Israel. And unlike the way that there were a lot of smuggling of weapons, ammunition, and all kinds of mortars and missiles, etc., by tunnels through Rafah, which has a border with Egypt, calling that a prison, I would say, would be wrong. Why? Because Israel has left Gaza totally, entirely in 2005. We quitted unilaterally Gaza. We dismantled and uprooted the settlements that were there. 8,500 people were uprooted and brought back to Israel proper, and we've removed every soldier and every civilian from Gaza. But what happened to Gaza since 2005? What happened to Gaza since 2005? Hamas took over, and instead of allowing the Gazans to live normally, they made them a human shield for them to attack Israel.
Ezzedine, let me just add a question, because I do remember there was a big debate about something that the UN Secretary General said after October 7th. You know, this terrible massacre happened. He said this didn't happen in a vacuum, and that created a huge outrage at the time. What did you think about that at the time, and help us understand what this looks like from an Egyptian point of view?
I just want to know if the participant asked the question so that he can see us disagree finally, or what?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I don't think the Secretary General statement was very helpful coming from him. But having said that, terrorism is, the easiest, simplest definition of terrorism is that it is violence for political purpose. It is not just insane, senseless murders and so on. It has a political purpose, it has a political function. And if we don't understand the political purpose, political function, then we don't understand what is happening, right? Now, and from there, to understand then, there is always there is always radical ideas. In any societies, there are marginal, radical ideas that are heinous, that are bordering insanity. The question is, what makes those ideas gain traction and what makes them remain marginal? And you can see this in every society on other issues as well, right? What makes the far right suddenly an important political force in a country where everybody thought that had left that behind long ago, right? So you can, again, this is like the preaching part that I was referring to. You can say, oh, those are crazy ideas, this is murderous and so on. It is. But if you want to understand why it becomes popular, you need the context. Now, the context became a triggering word in Israel because people hear it like a justification. But we can be reasonable people. We can understand that explaining something doesn't justify it. Saying that Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, which has an insane ideology, had become a popular force for a reason. And that reason has to do with occupation, the endlessness of occupation, the fact that it's not temporary, that there is no exit inside, has to do with the settlement expansion, has to do with all of this, right? It doesn't mean that this ideology is justifiable. It means that this is a problem that has to be addressed, the settlement, the lack of political prospect for Palestinian statehood, so that Hamas doesn't have a 60% support, that Hamas goes back to having 15% support, and hopefully less and less. This is what context means to me.
Thank you so much. It feels, we're now getting there, but the time is almost over. But Clara, I wouldn't want to close this session without going back to you and asking you what Menti has in store for us.
So we have one question on the culture of healthy debates, and it seems like maybe it's a good closing question. What do you think is key to creating spaces where constructive debates can take place?
Love this question. Can I take a stab at it?
You can start.
I'll take a stab at it because where I work at Dartmouth College, we have been, I don't know if you have been following the pro-Palestinian kind of protest in the United States in particular, and we had in the Ivy League universities like Columbia and so on, we had very kind of problematic atmospheres, anti-Semitism, and so on and so forth. And while we at Dartmouth managed not to avoid most of that, and the reason is we have been cultivating, Jewish studies and Middle Eastern studies have been working together, and we have been cultivating not a spirit of dialogue like everybody has to love each other, but a spirit of multiplicity of perspectives, and understanding that this is a complex, like any conflict. It's complex. Being complex doesn't mean it's complicated only. It means that it has different facets. It has different threads that are all interwoven. And to understand it, you have to kind of understand all these perspectives and understand why they make sense to the people that believe in them. And understanding Zionism and how Zionism could be an emancipatory nationalist movement. And at the same time, understand how the Palestinians can see it as, and why they should see it, as a settler colonial movement. And how how you can hold both truths at the same time because they're both part of the story. And for me, this is a foundation. Just if we agree on the start that we're all human, that we all subscribe to more or less the same values, but then we have different perspectives, then we can have difficult conversations, at the end of which we still disagree on things because we subscribe to perspectives as people. But we can, at least I can understand how someone like Gilad can have a different perspective on it and why he's not doing this because he's evil, but his perspective represents where he comes from, history, concerns, motivations, and so on. And he can do the same.
That is a fantastic... That is a fantastic closing statement. Gilad, anything you would want to add to that?
Well, I've really nothing to add to what Ezzedine said. I believe in that. I believe in that. We have to learn each other's concerns, fears, interests, and aspirations, and we have to relate to that. One exercise that I've always been very keen to be doing during the negotiations is to change places, to be in the other party's shoes, and then try to put the argument of the other party that is in front of me in the negotiation table, and then sometimes you understand when you try to articulate what is the standpoint and the position and the beliefs of the other party. When you articulate it yourself, you understand it much better. Then it is very easy to come back to your place around the table and shake hands and understand the other, and look for a common vision and a joint perspective of the future, for a better future, to change the reality from the current one to a better one, and to help the other party market or sell the outcome of the negotiations instead of poking a finger in his eyes. That's it.
And that is a mechanism, I think, your applause. That is a mechanism that can be applied in many situations in life, not only in conflicts. Wow, thank you so much for an intriguing session, which leaves me with a lot of question marks, I have to add, and a lot of points that I still need to and want to think about. But what encourages me is that there's people like you who do continue to keep the channels open, and who keep talking and sharing their perspectives also with us. So thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to this first event here at Körber Forum this year. You're cordially invited to stay around for a bit, for a glass of wine or beer, to talk about what we've just discussed. So once again, thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for organizing this.